The real value of time. Time does not shout. It whispers. It never tells you when it is leaving. It never warns you when you are wasting it. It simply slips away, quietly, like water running through open fingers. One moment you feel like you have forever, and the next moment you look back and wonder where all the days went, where all the dreams went, where all the courage you once had disappeared to. Time is the most loyal companion you will ever have, yet the most unforgiving teacher. It gives you every second for free, but it charges you everything for how you use it. Some people learn this truth early, some learn it late, and some never learn it at all. But everyone, without exception, pays the price. There is a moment in every person's life when they suddenly feel time touching them, a soft reminder that nothing stays, that every choice matters, that every hesitation takes something away, that waiting always costs more than moving. And when that moment comes, you either wake up and change your life, or you let time continue slipping away while convincing yourself you'll start one day. But one day does not exist. Only now does. This is the story of someone who discovered that truth the hard way, a journey of losing time, fearing time, fighting time, and finally understanding its real value. The story begins quietly, like all life-changing moments do. Not with a big event. Not with a crisis. Just a simple realization that hits the heart like a slow, deep wave: if I don't change now, nothing will ever change. That was the moment everything began.
Chapter 1. The clock I never noticed. I used to believe time was something far away from me, something that lived outside my world, something that only mattered to older people who talked about regrets and missed chances, but not to someone like me who thought every tomorrow would wait patiently until I was ready for it. I walked through each day as if hours were endless and days were cheap, waking up late, scrolling through my phone for no reason, telling myself I would start working on my goals later, and convincing myself that small delays didn't matter because life was long and there would always be more time. But time has a strange way of revealing its truth, not suddenly, but slowly, like a quiet shadow that grows longer every day until one morning you notice it stretching across your life, and you wonder how long it has been following you. For me, that moment came on a morning that looked ordinary, a morning I almost slept through again. Except something felt different when I opened my eyes and looked around my room. The mess on the desk, the unfinished notes, the forgotten plans, the thousands of small promises I made to myself and never kept. And suddenly I realized I didn't recognize the person I had become. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't unmotivated. I wasn't a failure. But I was drifting through days like a leaf moving wherever the wind pushed it, without intention, without urgency, without direction. I got up and looked in the mirror, and for the first time I saw how tired I looked. Not the tiredness that comes from working hard, but the tiredness that comes from wasting your own potential. And that kind of tiredness cuts deeper than any physical exhaustion. I remember standing there and thinking about how many dreams I once had, how many ambitions I used to feel burning in my chest, and how quietly they had faded simply because I kept telling myself I would start tomorrow. I felt something inside me break a little, not in a painful way, but in a way that wakes you up from a long sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. And I suddenly understood something I had never truly understood before. Time had been moving even when I wasn't, and it had been moving fast. The world around me was changing. People my age were learning, growing, building, failing, trying again, pushing themselves forward while I was still standing in the same place I had been years ago, smiling on the outside, but quietly afraid on the inside. Afraid to start, afraid to fail, afraid to commit, afraid to see who I could become if I actually tried. And that fear had cost me more than any mistake ever had. I realized that morning that time doesn't stop for people who hesitate. It doesn't wait for people who doubt themselves. It doesn't pause for people who are scared. Time moves, always, silently, ruthlessly, and if you don't move with it, you slowly fall behind until one day you wake up and all you have left is regret. And as I sat there, I felt a thought rise in me like a whisper. If I don't take control of my time now, time will take control of my life forever. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to fix everything. I didn't know how to become disciplined or focused or strong. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I could not continue living the same way. Because the version of me who ignored time was disappearing and a new version was begging to be born. So I stood up, took a deep breath, and made the smallest but most important decision of my life. Today, not tomorrow, not someday, but today, I would start paying attention to time. I would start taking every hour seriously. I would start living instead of drifting. And with that simple decision, something inside me shifted, like a door opening slightly, letting the first light of a new life shine through. I didn't change completely that day, but that morning became the beginning of everything that would follow. The moment I finally stopped pretending I had endless time and started learning the real value of the time I had left. Chapter 2. When I finally saw where my time was going. The day after I decided to start paying attention to time, I woke up with a strange mix of determination and confusion because even though my mind was ready to change, my habits were not. And habits are like invisible chains. You don't notice how tightly they hold you until you try to move. I picked up my phone, and without thinking, my finger automatically went to the same apps I always opened every morning. And that was the moment I realized something important. Most of the time I lost wasn't taken from me. It was given away by me, slowly, willingly, quietly. I sat there and watched myself mindlessly scroll for a few seconds, and it felt like watching someone else. Someone who kept repeating the same actions even though those actions brought nothing meaningful to their life. I locked my phone and placed it face down. Then I just sat still, trying to notice everything I had ignored before, and I became aware of something that shocked me. My mind was constantly searching for distractions, not because I needed them, but because I was used to them. Because distraction had become my comfort zone, I wondered how many hours of my life had been spent escaping from thoughts I should have been facing and avoiding tasks I should have completed, all because distraction felt easier than discipline. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't running out of time, I was leaking time. Like a cup with tiny holes that loses water drop by drop until it becomes empty without anyone noticing. I realized that if I wanted to change my life, I had to first understand where my time was going. So I spent that day observing myself, not judging, not blaming, just watching. And what I discovered surprised me in ways I didn't expect. Every small decision I made had a cost in minutes. And those minutes added up silently to become hours. Checking messages just for a second, switching between tasks, sitting down without a plan, telling myself 5 more minutes. All of these tiny choices were shaping my entire life. Time was not being stolen from me by some external force. It was slipping through my fingers because I wasn't holding it tightly. As the day continued, I felt uncomfortable, almost embarrassed, because I finally saw the truth that had always been right there in front of me. I had not been living intentionally. I had been living automatically. I had been reacting to everything without consciously choosing anything. And when you live like that, your days don't feel like your own. They feel borrowed, unfocused, scattered. And I think that was the moment something clicked inside me. A deep realization that the first step to respecting time is understanding it. I couldn't change what I didn't measure, and I couldn't improve what I didn't acknowledge. So I made a promise to myself. Every day from now on, I would be honest about how I spent my time. Not strict, not harsh, but honest, because honesty is the foundation of growth. Once you face the truth, you can learn to shape it. Once you see the leaks, you can start repairing them. And once you understand your patterns, you can create new ones. By evening, I felt both tired and strangely proud, because for the first time in a long time, I had actually observed my life instead of moving blindly through it. I sat on my bed thinking about everything I had noticed, the wasted minutes, the unnecessary distractions, the anxiety of doing nothing meaningful, the fear that pushed me back into old habits, and the hope that pulled me forward into new possibilities. And at that moment, I understood something deeper. Progress doesn't start with action, it starts with awareness. Awareness is the light that reveals the path, and without it, even the strongest motivation leads nowhere. So that night, I wrote down one simple sentence. Tomorrow, I start shaping my time, not chasing it. And as I closed my notebook, I felt a calm determination rise inside me, because I knew the journey had truly begun. Chapter 3. The day I learned that time responds to clarity. I woke up the next morning with the sentence from last night still echoing in my mind. And instead of letting the day pull me in every direction like it always did, I decided to start by asking myself a question I had never seriously asked before. What exactly do I want today to become? And that single question, simple as it sounded, changed the entire rhythm of my morning because suddenly the day wasn't something happening to me. It was something I had the power to shape. I sat quietly, letting my thoughts settle like dust in sunlight, and I realized that I had spent so much of my life feeling rushed not because I didn't have enough time, but because I didn't have enough clarity. When the mind is scattered, the day becomes scattered, and when the day is scattered, time slips away unnoticed. So I took out my notebook and wrote 3 things, just 3, that I wanted to complete before the day ended. Not 10, not 20, just 3 clear intentions. They weren't dramatic goals or huge dreams. They were simple, meaningful actions. 1 thing for my growth, 1 thing for my responsibilities, 1 thing for my future. And as I wrote them, I felt something easing inside me, as if the chaos that always lived in my mind suddenly stepped aside to make room for direction. I had always underestimated the power of clarity. I thought motivation and energy were the main ingredients of progress, but I was wrong. Clarity was the compass, the quiet force that tells every minute where to go. Without clarity, even strong effort becomes wasted effort because time without direction becomes noise, and I had lived in that noise for too long. So I carried my notebook with me throughout the day, and every time my attention drifted or my mind tried to escape into comfort through distraction, I looked at the 3 intentions I had written, and immediately the fog lifted and the path became visible again. I wasn't perfect. There were moments when I still reached for my phone. Moments when old habits whispered familiar excuses. Moments when I hesitated between starting something meaningful or doing something easy. But each time, clarity pulled me back gently but firmly, reminding me who I wanted to become. I noticed something else too. When I knew exactly what I needed to do, time felt different. It moved slower, calmer, more cooperatively, almost as if time itself respected a person who respected direction. I realized that humans don't struggle with time. We struggle with decision, and once the decision is clear, time naturally aligns with it. In the afternoon, I completed the 2nd intention, and the sense of quiet satisfaction I felt was unlike anything I felt from random busyness. It wasn't the loud excitement of temporary motivation. It was the grounded confidence of knowing I was finally using my hours with purpose. And that confidence grew throughout the day, shaping my actions, my mood, even my thoughts. I began to see that time rewards clarity the way a seed rewards attention. Slowly at first, subtly at first, but undeniably over time. As evening approached, I reviewed my 3 intentions and realized I had completed all of them. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but genuinely, with intention and awareness. And that small achievement felt like a turning point. Not because the tasks themselves were extraordinary, but because I had finally proven to myself that clarity creates progress. It isn't about doing everything. It's about knowing what matters and doing that. Before sleeping, I wrote down something new in my notebook, a sentence that flowed naturally from the reality I had just experienced. Clarity turns hours into steps, and steps into progress. As I closed my notebook, I felt something shift inside me, a growing belief that if I could continue shaping my days with clear intention, then slowly, steadily, patiently, I could shape my life too. And in that quiet moment before sleep, I realized that real change doesn't begin with a dramatic transformation. It begins with a single clear day, lived with purpose. Chapter 4. The moment I realized small routines shape entire futures. I didn't know it then, but the morning of the 4th day would become one of the most important turning points of my journey, because it was the first day I truly understood the hidden power of routines, not the big ones people brag about online, not the impossible ones no normal person can maintain, but the small, quiet routines that seem insignificant at first glance, yet slowly reshape the direction of a life. I woke before the alarm, something that almost never happened, and for a minute I just lay there, listening to the faint hum of the world outside, realizing that something inside me had already begun to shift. The heaviness I used to feel every morning was lighter, the confusion was quieter, and instead there was a sense of readiness, as if my mind knew what it needed to do without a fight. I sat up, stretched, and went straight to my notebook, not because I forced myself to, but because it had already become a familiar anchor, a small routine that connected yesterday's intention to today's possibility. And as I flipped through the pages, I saw the traces of clarity I had formed, thoughts, reflections, simple goals, and I realized something profound. Routines are not about discipline. They are about identity, about reminding myself each day who I am trying to become. So I wrote my 3 intentions for the day, and instead of rushing or overthinking, the words came calmly, as if they had been waiting. Then I made my bed. A habit so small I never imagined it mattered. But that morning it felt like a declaration. I am taking responsibility for my space, my time, my life. And that simple act set a tone for the whole morning, a steady rhythm that made everything afterward feel more manageable. I brewed tea, the steam rising softly, and in that gentle moment I understood something people rarely talk about, that routines don't change your life overnight. But they slowly build a structure around your time so that your mind has space to grow inside it. Without routine, life becomes a series of random reactions. But with even a simple routine, life starts to feel guided, supported, and meaningful. As the day continued, I stuck to the small actions I had chosen: a 20-minute walk, a focused work session, a quiet moment of journaling. And I noticed how these little rituals didn't drain my energy. They gave me energy, like small sources of momentum that kept me moving forward even when motivation faded. Routines, I realized, were not cages but pathways, not restrictions but the gentle rails that keep a person on track when life tries to pull them in every direction. And as I repeated those small routines throughout the day, I began to notice another truth. The more consistent I became in tiny actions, the more confident I felt about bigger goals. Confidence wasn't a sudden burst of courage. It was the quiet accumulation of tiny wins: a made bed, a completed task, a finished reflection, a kept promise to myself. By evening, something remarkable happened. I didn't feel exhausted the way I usually did at the end of a busy day. Instead, I felt grounded, steady, almost proud. Not because the day was perfect, but because it was intentional. And that sense of intention, repeated day after day, was beginning to form the foundation of a new identity, one that belonged to someone who didn't just survive time but guided it. Before sleeping, I sat by the window and watched the last light fade from the sky. And in that soft dimness, I reflected on the truth that had revealed itself slowly throughout the day, that the future is not built by dramatic changes. It is built by gentle routines, repeated quietly and consistently, until one day you look back and realize your entire life is different. As I closed my notebook for the night, I understood that these small routines were not temporary tools. They were invitations to become someone stronger, clearer, and more intentional than I had ever been before. And I whispered to myself the lesson of the day. Small routines do not seem powerful, but they decide who you become. Chapter 5. The day I learned that time doesn't slow down, but I can. The 5th day arrived quietly, without any dramatic moment. But sometimes it's the ordinary mornings that reveal the truths you've been ignoring for years. I woke up already feeling the weight of the tasks waiting for me. Messages to reply, work to finish, responsibilities stacking higher than my energy. But instead of rushing out of bed the way I used to, panicked and overwhelmed, I stayed still for a moment and allowed myself to breathe, slow and deep, until the noise inside my head softened. And in that small pause, I realized something I had never truly understood. Time will never slow down for me. It will always keep moving at its own pace, indifferent to my stress, my plans, my feelings. But I can slow myself down. I can move through time calmly, even when life is demanding more than I think I can give. With that awareness, I sat up and began my morning routine. Not quickly, not mechanically, but deliberately, tasting the moments one by one instead of rushing through them as if they didn't matter. I brushed my teeth slower, made tea without hurrying, stood by the window for a few quiet breaths. And as I noticed the morning light touching the buildings, I felt something shift inside me, a gentle clarity that said, "You don't need to run to be productive. You just need to move with intention." This was a foreign idea to me. Someone who had always associated speed with success, someone who believed the faster I worked, the better I would become. But now I began to see how much stress, mistakes, and chaos that mindset had created in my life. I spent so many years chasing time that I never learned how to walk with it. That day, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of planning an impossible list of tasks and exhausting myself, I chose only 3 priorities, 3 things I wanted to give my energy to. And suddenly the day felt more manageable, more humane. I started my work in a calmer rhythm, and something surprising happened. I was more focused than usual, less distracted, less overwhelmed, as if slowing down gave my mind room to think clearly. And as I worked, I realized that rushing had never helped me accomplish more. In fact, most of my mistakes, most of my anxiety, most of my burnout came from trying to compress my life into an impossible pace. Midday, I took a break, not because I was tired, but because I promised myself I would no longer treat rest as something to earn after collapsing. I would treat rest as something necessary, something that kept me human. I walked outside, feeling the breeze on my face, listening to the sounds around me. And for the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel like it was pushing me. It felt like I was finally moving at a pace that matched my mind. In that quiet walk, I understood a deep truth. Slowing down is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of awareness, a sign that you finally know how to separate urgency from importance. When I returned home, I continued the day with the same calm presence, doing tasks one at a time instead of juggling everything at once. And even though I wasn't rushing, I was completing more than I expected, because when your mind is steady, your actions become efficient. Throughout the afternoon, distractions tried to pull me away, notifications, worries, unnecessary thoughts. But each time, I gently guided myself back, reminding myself that I didn't need to entertain every thought, didn't need to respond to every noise, didn't need to say yes to every demand. Time wasn't shrinking. I simply used to waste it by scattering my attention everywhere. Now, by slowing down, I was holding my attention in one place long enough to make real progress. Evening arrived gently, and as I looked back on the day, I felt a sense of accomplishment without exhaustion, satisfaction without stress. It was the first time in months that I ended the day without feeling mentally drained. As I prepared for sleep, I realized that the most powerful lesson of the day was not about productivity, but about peace. Peace that comes when you stop fighting the speed of time and instead learn how to move gracefully within it. Before turning off the lights, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. Time doesn't slow down, but I can choose the pace of my life. And in that moment, I knew something fundamental had changed inside me. I wasn't just learning how to use time. I was learning how to live. Chapter 6. The day I realized strength doesn't always feel like strength. The 6th day came with a heaviness I couldn't explain. I woke up feeling slower, quieter, almost as if something inside me was tired even though I had slept enough. And for a moment, I wondered if this meant I was going backward, losing the progress I thought I had made these past days. But then I remembered something important. Growth is not a straight line, and strength doesn't always feel strong. Sometimes strength feels like getting out of bed when you don't want to. Sometimes it feels like facing a day you're not ready for. Sometimes it feels like showing up even when your heart is dragging behind you. So I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing through the discomfort, and instead of forcing myself to be positive, I allowed myself to feel exactly how I felt. Tired, unsure, a little sad for no clear reason. And in that honesty, something softened, something unclenched, because pretending to be okay has always drained me more than the struggles themselves. I got ready slowly, noticing how my mind wanted to criticize me for being behind, for not feeling energetic, for not being as productive as yesterday. But each time the self-criticism rose, I countered it gently with a quiet thought. It's okay to have hard days. It's okay to be slower today. It's okay to not be at your best every single moment. And as those kinder thoughts settled in, I felt the tension in my chest loosen just a little. Breakfast tasted like nothing, but I finished it anyway, because I promised myself I would take care of my body even when my emotions were messy. And during that small act, I realized something meaningful. Discipline is not just pushing yourself on good days. It's also treating yourself with compassion on bad ones. Mid-morning, I tried to begin my work, but my mind felt foggy, like thoughts were slipping through my fingers before I could grab them. Normally, this kind of mental fog would frustrate me until I felt useless, but today I understood that fighting the fog would only make it thicker, so I took a step back, closed my laptop, and decided to break my tasks into tiny pieces. Absurdly tiny, almost too easy to fail. And strangely, doing that helped. I completed one small task, then another, until the fog lifted just enough for me to keep going. It wasn't fast, it wasn't impressive, but it was movement, and movement, no matter how small, is still progress. Around midday, a wave of sadness hit me again. Not dramatic sadness, just a quiet heaviness that made me want to lie down and disappear for a while. But instead of collapsing into it, I acknowledged it like an uninvited guest knocking on my door. I didn't welcome it in, but I didn't ignore it either. I simply observed it, breathed through it, and let it pass through me without giving it a story. I realized that most of my emotional pain never came from the emotion itself. It came from the story I created about the emotion. The fear that something was wrong with me, that I wasn't strong enough, that I was falling apart. But today I told myself, feeling tired doesn't mean you're failing. Feeling sad doesn't mean you've lost your strength. It simply means you're human. With that understanding, the heaviness didn't disappear, but it became lighter to carry. In the afternoon, I decided to take a longer break than usual. Walking outside, even though I didn't feel like it. The sky looked dull, the wind felt cold, and nothing particularly beautiful caught my eye. But the simple act of walking reminded me that the world continues to move whether I feel powerful or not. And there was a strange comfort in that. I didn't need to match the world's energy. I just needed to stay connected to it. On my way back, I noticed a small plant growing between cracks on the sidewalk. Fragile, tiny, but stubbornly alive. And for some reason that sight anchored me. That plant didn't choose perfect conditions, didn't wait for the right soil, didn't complain about the cracks. It simply grew where it was, with what it had, at its own pace. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. A small reminder that resilience isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, almost invisible, but powerful all the same. The evening came with more calmness than I expected. The heaviness didn't fully leave, but it settled, no longer overwhelming me, just resting beside me like a reminder that hard days don't erase progress. They deepen it. They shape it. They teach it. Before sleep, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, keep going. And as I closed the book, I realized that today, even in my heaviness, I had kept going. And maybe that was the strongest thing I had done all week. Chapter 7. The day I started listening to my future self. On the 7th day, something unusual happened, not in the world around me, but in the silent space inside my mind where my thoughts usually argued, complained, rushed, or spiraled. Today that space felt different, like someone else was there with me. Not a stranger, not a critic, not the voice of doubt I had carried for years, but a calmer version of me. The version I hadn't met yet, but always hoped to become. The version I imagined on those nights when I told myself that I could be better if I just tried a little harder. And for the first time, that future version of me didn't feel far away or imaginary. It felt close, like a quiet companion standing just a half step ahead, waiting for me to follow. I didn't know if it was intuition, clarity, or just the result of 7 days of consistent reflection, but when I woke up, I felt guided. Not pushed, not forced, just gently guided by this inner presence. That seemed to whisper, if you want to change your life, start listening to the person you want to become, not the person you're trying to escape from. This thought stayed with me as I moved through the morning, brushing my teeth, washing my face, preparing my breakfast. Ordinary tasks suddenly felt like part of something bigger, like small rituals leading toward a quiet transformation I couldn't fully see yet, but could feel growing beneath the surface. And because of that feeling, I moved differently, slower, more aware, not drifting on autopilot like I normally did, but intentionally, as though my future self was watching and nodding with approval, saying, yes, that's it, keep choosing the little things that build the life you want. Usually my mornings felt scattered, but today every motion felt aligned, like my mind and body were finally walking in the same direction. When I sat down to work, the old version of me, the one who panicked, rushed, doubted, tried to rise again, whispering that I wasn't good enough, that the tasks were too many, that I would fall behind. But then something remarkable occurred. The voice of my future self quietly responded, not with dramatic motivation, but with simple clarity. Focus on the next step, not the whole mountain. And that one sentence saved me from drowning in my worries, pulling me out of anxiety like a hand reaching through water. I took a deep breath, grounded myself, and began working one small task at a time. And strangely enough, the more I listened to that silent guidance, the easier everything felt, not because the work was easier, but because I finally stopped fighting myself. Midday brought a moment of reflection, standing by the window with my cup in hand, staring at the world outside. People walking fast, cars rushing by, time moving in its unstoppable way, and I suddenly understood something. My life wasn't being controlled by the person I wanted to become, it was being controlled by the person I used to be. Every fear, every hesitation, every moment of self-doubt came from a past version of myself that was trying to survive, not grow. But I wasn't in survival mode anymore. I had started a journey. A deliberate journey to reshape my mindset, my habits, my identity. And to continue that journey, I needed to stop letting the past version of me make decisions that belonged to the future version of me. This realization hit me harder than I expected, leaving a strange warmth in my chest, like a truth I had been avoiding suddenly stepped into the light. In the afternoon, I tested this new understanding, asking myself before every action, what would my future self choose right now? And the answers were surprisingly simple. Drink water instead of scrolling. Take a 5-minute break instead of forcing myself into burnout. Speak kindly to myself instead of criticizing every small mistake. Stay focused on one task instead of trying to do everything at once. None of these actions were spectacular, but each one felt like shifting onto a different path. A path that wasn't controlled by fear or old habits, but by intention. And as the hours passed, something deep inside me began to change. A sense of authority, of inner leadership, like I was finally stepping into the role of the person in charge of my life rather than the person reacting to it. In the early evening, the world around me grew quieter, and in that quiet, I felt connected to that future version of myself more strongly than ever. I imagined their life, steady, peaceful, disciplined, confident, purposeful, and instead of feeling jealous of that version or overwhelmed by how far I still had to go, I felt something new. Partnership. It felt like my future self wasn't above me or ahead of me, but walking with me, guiding me with each choice I made today. And in that companionship, the heaviness of past days lifted. I felt lighter, clearer, more grounded. I understood that change didn't happen in a sudden burst. It happened through hundreds of small choices that slowly formed a new identity. By nighttime, as I lay in bed, the voice of my old self tried one last time to pull me into doubt, asking if this transformation was real, if it would last, if I was just pretending to be someone better. But my future self answered calmly, almost like a steady heartbeat. Real change begins the moment you stop asking if you can do it and simply begin acting like the person who already has. And that sentence carried me into sleep, not with excitement or fear, but with a comforting sense of direction. I wasn't lost anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally walking toward the life that was waiting for me, one decision at a time. Chapter 8. The day everything hit me at once. On the 8th day, everything felt heavier than usual, not because something went wrong, but because everything I had ignored for years finally demanded my attention all at once, like unopened letters stacked in a corner, suddenly spilling onto the floor. I woke up with a weight on my chest that even deep breathing couldn't dissolve, a pressure that felt like the world asking, "Are you really changing, or are you just pretending again?" And for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I moved slowly through the room, noticing little things, unfinished tasks, old notes, reminders of promises I made to myself and never kept, and each one felt like a quiet accusation, a question echoing. If you could have changed earlier, why didn't you? The truth hit harder than I expected. I wasn't just fighting bad habits. I was fighting the version of myself that had chosen comfort instead of growth for so long. I made breakfast but couldn't taste it. I sat at my desk but couldn't focus. I looked at my phone but nothing there mattered. The heaviness followed me like a shadow that refused to detach. It was one of those days when the mind becomes loud, flooding with old memories, regrets, things I thought I had already healed from. Suddenly, I was remembering the times I let people down, the opportunities one missed, the days I wasted convincing myself that I had time, the nights I lied that I'd start tomorrow. I thought the past 7 days of effort would erase all that, but instead they brought it all to the surface, revealing every place inside me that still needed to be rebuilt. The intensity of it made me sit down and breathe slowly, but the thoughts kept coming. Pictures of who I used to be, the excuses, the emotional escapes, the endless cycle of stopping and restarting, and I wondered if I really had the strength to escape that loop this time. But as the heaviness grew, something else grew with it: awareness. Awareness that this discomfort wasn't failure. It was the breaking of an old shell, the collapse of a mindset that didn't serve me anymore. And the collapse always feels messy, painful, overwhelming. The more I listened to the noise inside me, the more I realized that what I felt wasn't the destruction of progress, but the destruction of denial. It was my mind finally admitting everything I avoided, that I wasted time, that I hid behind fears, that I lived below my own expectations, that I protected my comfort more than my potential. For a long moment I sat with that honesty, letting it sting, letting it burn, letting it strip away the illusions I had carried. And strangely, beneath the pain, I felt a kind of freedom, because the moment you stop lying to yourself, even softly, you create space for a new truth to grow. In the afternoon, the heaviness didn't disappear, but it softened, like a storm that decided not to destroy everything but to cleanse instead. I walked outside for air, and the world felt strangely clearer, the sky brighter, the wind colder, the sound of footsteps around me sharper. Everything felt real, almost too real, and I realized how many days I had lived half awake, drifting, postponing, surviving instead of living. As I walked, I began speaking to myself in a tone I had never used before. Not gentle, not harsh, but honest. I told myself that if I wanted a new life, I had to stop negotiating with old habits. If I wanted discipline, I had to stop justifying distractions. If I wanted confidence, I had to stop feeding insecurity. If I wanted growth, I had to stop protecting the identity that kept me small. And with each truth spoken inside my mind, I felt another layer of the old me fall away. Evening arrived with a sense of emotional exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from doing too much, but from finally confronting too much. I sat by the window, looking at the city lights, and asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What would happen if I stopped running from discomfort and started running toward the person I want to become? The answer surprised me. It wasn't dramatic or motivational. It was simple. My life would finally begin. And with that realization, something shifted inside me. The heaviness turned into determination, the pain into clarity, the doubt into direction. I understood that change isn't only about adding new habits. It's about releasing the emotional weight attached to the old ones. It's about facing the uncomfortable truth of who you used to be and letting it push you, not into guilt, but into transformation. Before I went to bed, I felt strangely grateful for the chaos of the day because it forced me to reset, to redefine my intentions, to recommit to becoming someone I respected. And as I closed my eyes, the last thought that echoed within me was a quiet promise. If the old version of me tries to return, I won't let him take over. Not this time. Not after everything I faced today. And with that promise, the heaviness finally loosened its grip, leaving me tired but clearer, drained but stronger, shaken but ready. Ready for the life waiting beyond the person I used to be. Chapter 9. The Quiet Power I Didn't Know I Had. On the 9th day, something felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way that I almost missed at first. There was no sudden burst of motivation, no overwhelming heaviness like yesterday, no loud inner voice pushing or pulling me. Just an unusual sense of clarity, like my mind had cleaned itself overnight without asking for permission. I lay there for a moment listening to the silence in the room, and for the first time in a long time the silence didn't feel empty or pressuring. It felt peaceful, like a space I had earned. I got up and moved around slowly, noticing how my thoughts weren't racing ahead or running back into the past. They were simply here, in the present, grounded in what I was doing right now. Something about that grounded feeling surprised me, because I had always assumed that change would feel explosive or loud. But instead it felt like a quiet shift in weight, like the balance inside me had finally tilted in my favor without me noticing exactly when it happened. As I made my breakfast, I realized I wasn't arguing with myself today. I wasn't fighting the urge to take the easy way out. I wasn't negotiating with procrastination. I wasn't forcing myself to choose the right thing. I was simply doing it, naturally, almost effortlessly, and it made me wonder if this was what growth actually feels like when it settles into your bones. Throughout the morning, I found myself moving with a new sense of purpose. Not dramatic, not rushed, not fueled by anxiety, but steady, like a quiet current guiding me forward. And I kept thinking about how these past days, especially the difficult ones, shaped this moment. How the heaviness from yesterday carved space for today's clarity. How the confusion from earlier days sharpened into understanding. How the resistance I used to feel slowly turned into acceptance. It dawned on me that transformation isn't a straight line. It's a collection of moments, small and big, that weave together until one day you wake up and realize you're not the same person anymore. As I worked through my tasks, I noticed something else. My mistakes didn't trigger panic, my delays didn't create shame, and my imperfections didn't feel like failures. Instead, I felt patient with myself. Almost gentle, as if I finally understood that growth doesn't require perfection, only consistency. And that realization made me breathe a little deeper, stand a little taller, trust myself a little more. In the afternoon, I sat by the window with a notebook, not because I planned to write, but because something inside me wanted to capture the feeling of this day. I wrote down the small changes I had made, not the dramatic ones, but the quiet ones. The way I responded to setbacks differently. The way I didn't run from discomfort. The way I showed up even when I didn't feel powerful. And as I wrote, I realized that these small internal victories mattered more than any external achievement I used to chase. I thought about the person I was before this journey began. The one always trapped between fear and hesitation, always pretending to be fine, always waiting for the right moment, always hoping change would happen without effort. And as I compared that version to who I felt like today, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Not pride, not excitement, just gratitude for the fact that I didn't give up, even on the days when giving up would have been easier. Evening came with a soft, calm glow from the setting sun. And as I watched the sky shift from gold to blue, I realized I wasn't chasing time anymore. I wasn't racing. I wasn't struggling to catch up with myself. I was walking alongside my life instead of behind it. The future didn't feel distant or impossible anymore. It felt reachable, almost like it was waiting for me instead of running away from me. And that gave me a strange kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers. The kind that doesn't need validation because it comes from understanding yourself deeply. I spent the final hours of the night reflecting on everything I had learned. That the real strength I was looking for wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet and steady. That discipline wasn't punishment. It was self-respect. That time wasn't my enemy. It was my partner. That the person I wanted to become wasn't someone far away. He was simply the version of me that kept choosing the right thing even when it was hard. As I lay in bed, I felt a peaceful certainty settle inside me, a certainty that I was finally building a life from the inside outward, not from pressure, but from truth, not from fear, but from intention. And as sleep slowly pulled me in, the last thought that echoed gently in my mind was this. Maybe real growth isn't about trying harder. Maybe it's about becoming someone who no longer needs to try so hard. And with that quiet thought, I drifted into the kind of rest that only comes when your heart and your path finally begin to move in the same direction. Chapter 10. The Person I Finally Became. On the final day of the 90-day journey, I woke before the sun, not because an alarm forced me and not because I was stressed or restless, but because something inside me felt ready to face the quiet truth of who I had become, ready to step into the day with a kind of confidence I had never known. A confidence that didn't come from loud achievements or dramatic transformations, but from the slow, steady shaping of my own character. The room was still dim, the air cool, the world outside silent. And yet inside me there was a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the warmth of understanding, the warmth of acceptance, the warmth of knowing that I had spent the last 90 days not running from myself, but finally walking toward the version of me I had avoided for years. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I looked around at the small, ordinary details of my room. The books stacked in uneven piles. The notebook filled with messy entries from both good days and terrible days. The pen that had nearly run out of ink from all the reflections I had written. And I realized that these simple objects had become proof of one thing. That change wasn't something I talked about anymore. It was something I lived. I made a cup of warm tea and stood by the window watching the sky shift from darkness into orange light. And as the first rays touched the rooftops, I felt something inside me unlock, a quiet certainty that I didn't need to force myself to change anymore, because the change had already rooted itself deep within me. 90 days ago, I was someone who lived in hesitation, someone who feared beginnings, someone who carried the weight of old mistakes like a shadow. I measured my worth by how quickly I improved, how perfectly I performed, and how much approval I could gather. But now, as I breathed in the cool morning air, I could feel the difference in the way my thoughts moved. They were slower, steadier, kinder. I no longer punished myself for every misstep. I didn't expect perfection, and I didn't collapse under pressure when things didn't go the way I wanted. I had learned to pause instead of panic, to try instead of retreat, to correct instead of quit. And perhaps the most surprising part was that I no longer needed anyone to see my progress for it to matter. It mattered to me, and that was enough. I spent the morning reflecting on each phase of the journey. The confusion of the early days, the frustration of the middle days, the breakthroughs that came unexpectedly, the small steps that seemed insignificant at the time, but ended up building the foundation of who I was now. I remembered the days when I almost gave up, when my mind felt heavy and uncooperative, when my habits resisted change, when my heart felt tired from trying. And then I remembered the days when one small win shifted everything, when a little discipline gave me momentum, when a tiny moment of clarity made the next step easier. Change had not come from some dramatic decision or miracle. It had come from the consistent, imperfect effort of simply showing up every day, even when I didn't feel strong or ready. In the afternoon, I took a slow walk through the neighborhood, noticing things with a presence I never used to have. The sound of a bicycle passing, the smell of street food, the gentle hum of distant traffic, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves overhead. It struck me how peaceful the world looked when my mind wasn't filled with chaos. For years, I had blamed the world for feeling overwhelming. Now I realized that the chaos had been inside me, not outside. And for the first time, I felt a steady sense of control, not control over life itself, but control over how I responded to it. That alone was enough to make the world feel different. As evening approached, I sat down with my notebook, the same one that held all the struggles of this journey, and I wrote a single sentence that summed up everything these 90 days had taught me. I am not finished, but I am no longer lost. Writing those words made something inside me settle with unexpected calm. I no longer needed dramatic breakthroughs. I no longer needed to wait for motivation to strike. I didn't need validation or applause or recognition. What I needed, and what I now had, was discipline, self-respect, and the understanding that growth is not an event but a lifestyle. As the room grew darker, I closed my eyes and thought about the future. It didn't scare me like it used to. It didn't feel like something I needed to hide from or postpone. Instead, it felt open, flexible, inviting, a road I could walk at my own pace. I wasn't chasing anything this time. I was moving forward because it felt natural, because it felt right, because I had finally learned how to move without running from myself. On the night of the 90th day, as I prepared to sleep, I didn't feel the pressure to declare myself transformed or perfect or completely new. I simply felt grounded, stable, aware, a person who knew his weaknesses, honored his progress, trusted his pace, and understood that growth continues beyond the finish line. And in that quiet final moment, lying in the soft darkness of my room, I whispered one last thought to myself. This journey doesn't end here. It begins again tomorrow, with a better version of me leading the way. And with that calm, certain truth, I closed my eyes and let sleep come, carrying with it the quiet strength of everything I had become in these 90 days.